Hello, folks. My name is DC Rockwell, and this is my co-host Alia Greco, and this is Tech Topic, an hour-long deep dive into technology and its implications for society. Today, we would like to talk about Facebook, and not really about the consumer-facing features per se, but about its role in society and its impact on people. And generally, we're trying to talk about the question of whether or not Facebook is a good thing for humanity and whether or not it's a bad thing for humanity. Is it just a neutral thing for humanity? Is it just us, which is the problem, and not Facebook? Or is Facebook actually intrinsically, in some way, broken or wrong? So, Elio, why don't you get us started? What are your initial thoughts on Facebook?
Well, I like the fact that you use the term impact, because I was cracking up a little while ago. There's been some articles talking about the impact of driverless cars on society, which is a tragic term to use because there was that one death so far, and there will be more to follow, where that poorly made technology, like everything, there was a nice analysis afterwards that they did of how did that car fail and actually hit the person. Software errors, unintended consequences, and bad decisions, and you ended up killing someone. And when I say you, actually Uber ended up killing someone. And the safety driver, we'll do that in another episode, but the safety driver thing is just a liability shield. It's a ridiculous concept. If you understand anything about human psychology and physiology, it doesn't work. No safety driver will ever really be a safety for anything meaningful. It's just there to shield liability. So it's that person's fault rather than Uber's fault. But anyway, I digress into that a little bit because there's a lot of parallels between that and Facebook. And both of these things are heralded as these amazing society-changing inventions, but both of them have had some pretty negative consequences. So I'm not sure which part you want to start on, but there is so much to unpack. It's actually going to be hard to fit this into an hour, so we may have to continue this later. But yeah, Facebook, as nice as it is that you can now share pictures and videos and whatnot with friends, there's been some downsides. And I guess before I hand it back to you, like one thing that people forget, everyone thinks now that Facebook is like, it's the start of social media, and it wasn't. We had MySpace, we had Orkut, we had a whole slew, Friendster. This Facebook was like the 8th or the 12th one in. It was not the first one to do this. We had seen this and successfully. Orkut actually, until pretty recently, took off in, I believe it was South America, and that they dominated that market. Even though it came up here and just kind of disappeared, no one knew what the heck Orkut was. It was dominant in an entire region for a while until very recently when Facebook finally pushed it out. So this is not a new idea. And this idea of talking to friends, I think, could be done well. And it is kind of cool to be able to just kind of, it's this weird hybrid between postcards and an actual targeted, like an email, I'm talking to you specifically, but a message on Facebook or these other social media platforms, I'm just kind of putting it out there for whoever might want to see it. So it's like a broadcast postcard. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up the beginnings of social media. My first social media network, if you could call it that, was the X-band modem for the Sega Genesis.
Yeah,
it allowed you to sign up, create a profile, add friends through online game matching. Like you could play NBA Jam or you could play Mortal Kombat or whatever you wanted, and find other people who also had this modem that you basically plugged it into the Sega Genesis, then you plugged in your game to that, and you could find other people to play with if you're a lonely nerd like me. And one of the interesting things about it is that it let you send a thing, I think it was called like X mail or band mail or something like that.
Huh.
And it allowed you to send like emails to each other. And you can also like post information on your profile for other people to see. That was my first sort of taste of being part of a social network. And then also I would go to I would argue that AOL was also a form of a social network as well, because it had all of the features of almost all of the features, except for maybe the wall idea in AOL. and they did allow you to create your own like personal web pages and things like that. But back in the day, back in that time, you know, you could almost say that we had we had a version of Facebook, which was AOL took care of all of those kinds of communication features that we wanted. And then we had things like GeoCities and Angel Fire and these different things to create our own web pages where we would put out news about ourselves, you know, our 11-year-old selves giving news to the world because they really wanted to hear it. And it fulfilled all of those things that we wanted out of social media all the way back then. Now they've become more refined, they've become more integrated, but I would argue that we've been doing some form of social connection, some form of social interaction since at least the 80s, you know, with BBSs and things like that. So very interesting to look back on all of that. Today we have Facebook, and I think there's a lot of people who were born after Facebook came out that are on Facebook now, you know, and I don't remember do you know what year Facebook was launched?
Ooh, I don't remember off the top of my head. If you want to Google that real quick while I'm, I do want to come back to one thing. You mentioned the wall, and that terminology is interesting because there's actually a Unix command that you could do talk or you could do wall. Talk would talk to a certain person. This was back in the early days of Unix, where you had these huge mainframes and you had a whole bunch of people dialing in and telnetting into that computer. And so you could talk to a specific user, or you could just put it on the wall. And so there's a command called wall that would put a message on everyone's terminal who was logged into that machine. And that goes back to 1975. So that terminology and concept actually is like 45 years old. So yeah, people have been, as soon as we've had networking, people have basically been looking for ways to do something and communicate to groups. It's not a new idea at all. It's almost half a century old at this point.
Yeah. And I looked it up, and Facebook came out in 2004. So there are 16-year-olds who are today, they've never known a world without Facebook, you know, and arguably, you know, I guess I don't remember what the real cutoff of memory is, but it would be like about, you know, 4 or 5 years after that, you know, there's 20-year-olds out there possibly that they can't remember a time before Facebook. So Facebook's been around for a long time, and, you know, they're definitely ubiquitous today. Their stated mission is to make the world more open and connected. What do you think of that stated mission?
I think that if you read it literally, it's something we can agree with. The problem is, I think there's a huge disconnect between the literal reading of that message and any semblance of an implementation of that at Facebook. I mean, I think if you take a maybe slightly cynical and alternate view of what open and connected means, it's arguable that they have done so, but that's not the way I would want to interpret that message. They've definitely, like, privacy is kind of dying, and it's really ironic because Zuckerberg is known for, like, when the house he has in California, he bought up all the other properties around him so he could have privacy. And in Hawaii, he filed this lawsuit to kick people who've been living on the island. He wants the whole island that he bought up, this little Hawaiian island, and there's people who've been living there hundreds of years at least. And he filed a lawsuit to pull some shenanigans and kick them off their ancestral land so he could have the whole island, so he could have his privacy. So there's plenty of examples of Zuckerberg wanting privacy for him, but he's stated publicly many times he thinks privacy is an antiquated thing and there's no reason for it, which, again, really disjoint with how he's actually acted in the real world and how he's actually spent his money. He clearly personally believes in privacy, even though he thinks that it apparently is not something the rest of us should have. So there's an argument there. Again, cynical interpretation of the word open, of getting rid of privacy. I think you can have open technology and privacy. I don't think those are diametrically opposed. I think they're complementary. So I reject the view that Facebook has made us more open, because I think getting rid of privacy is not making us more open. I think it's destroying privacy, and that's a really dangerous thing. This idea that, oh, you don't have anything to hide. everyone's got something to hide. And not, it doesn't mean you did anything bad. You just should not be sharing all of your information with everyone all of the time. That is not a good policy. So the default should be you get to keep the information, that you create, the stuff you think, the stuff that, it's part of your life should just be yours, unless you want to let other people know it. There's some stuff you have to share to function in society, but there's other stuff there's no reason to share. So,
right. On March 6, 2019, Zuckerberg posted a privacy-focused vision for social networking. So I was just remembering that I remembered something about him having an evolving viewpoint on privacy. And, we can be cynical and we can say, well, he's just a liar or whatever. But these are the things that he says now, is that there should be that a privacy-focused platform should be built around several principles. Private interactions. People should have simple, intimate places where they have clear control over who can communicate with them and confidence that no one else can access what they share. Encryption. People's private communications should be secure. Reducing permanence. People should be comfortable being themselves and should not have to worry what they share coming back to hurt them later. Safety. People should expect that what we will do everything we can to keep them safe on our services. Interoperability. People should be able to use any of our apps to reach their friends, and they should be able to communicate across networks easily and securely. And finally, secure data storage. People should expect that we won't store sensitive data in countries with weak records on human rights like privacy and freedom of expression. Let's go through these real quick.
Yeah.
How about the first one? Private interactions. People should have simple, intimate places where they have clear control over who can communicate with them and confidence that no one else can access what they share. What do you think of that?
I think, yes. Once again, the stated literal word I totally agree with. I was trying to find a meme. There's this awesome meme about, when you mention something in the privacy of your home and Facebook, and it's got this guy like face right up to this other guy, like they're in your stuff. Like, you totally should have the ability to have a private conversation. That is definitely a thing that I think is damn near a human right, or it, should be declared as one, even though I don't think anyone actually does. So it's ironic that Facebook, that is in all of your conversations. I remember it was a big deal when Google first came out with Gmail. They had a little disclaimer, and I think people have forgotten, or maybe it's not that they've forgotten, it's just that everything else has followed suit and it's just the norm now. But they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to give you as much space as you want. We're not going to be like all the other providers. And because people forget how revolutionary having just basically unlimited email storage was. At the time, you had to pay a ton of money to get extra storage. And so you'd get, 15, 50 megs or something, and you have to very carefully, especially if anyone's sending you pictures, you'd have to make sure you download it all so the account didn't fill up. And Gmail's like, we're going to give you like a gigabyte, some insane at the time, just insane amount of storage, but we're going to read through your messages. We're not going to have people doing it, but we're going to have programs reading through your messages and then advertising to you. So you get, good ads. And that's how we're going to monetize. That's why we're going to give you. You're trading us your privacy for all that storage. And again, that at the time, that was pretty controversial. And it's the same thing with Facebook. Every single thing you do is read, is tracked. And we'll probably get to that when we talk about the current dispute with Apple and Facebook. Apple's pointing out all the stuff Facebook wants, which is basically just everything they possibly can hoover up about you. It's actually easier to list the things they don't collect, which is almost nothing at this point. So I would love that, but they're in everything. There is a third party. Everything you do on Facebook there's a third party in there that is constantly just digging through and seeing what it can monetize and storing it for later and correlating it with any other, information from other data brokers. And a secondary thing, besides that intrinsic problem, I sent you a link on our chat there. If you can pull that up, there's a great article that's still up, thankfully, called The Evolution of Privacy. Actually, I think it is. Hopefully it comes up. I have an archive version. I'll have to see if I can get to you if not. But it's called The Evolution of Privacy on Facebook. And they did this interesting radial graph. And they showed kind of who sees what data by default. And it's really interesting because you can clearly see the access growing over time where things started relative. Oh, excellent. There we are. So you could see the inner ring is like only you. I forget. I can't read off your screen there. Let me pull back up on mine. But the inner ring is you. The very center is you. Then there's your friends is the second ring. Then there's the network of people you know. Then the second to the outermost ring is all Facebook users. And then the outermost ring is the entire internet. So data you put in the site. And then each of the slices around here is, wall posts, photos, it's all this stuff. And so as you watch, I've seen you clicking over it there, you can see how it started where things were relatively locked down. By default, you weren't sharing very much. And then as we go through these years, the default settings, if you don't go in and change stuff, constantly get more and more permissive and more open. And the chances of you not realizing, because they didn't make huge announcements that, hey, we're going to share more of your stuff with everyone unless you specifically go lock it down. But we might change how locked down it is later, and we might make it easier. So you have to constantly stay on top of your settings to have any semblance of any kind of privacy in Facebook. And they've tended over the years, and this isn't even up to date. This stops in what year was that? 2010. So I don't know what the current state of things are, but you can never hide your data. It's always being shared with Facebook and their whole, data broker network, whoever else they decide to sell it to. And then even if that wasn't a problem, this default creep of privacy settings is really insidious, and most people just don't have the mental bandwidth to constantly every month go and see how much privacy am I losing every few months, and to go fight and redo the settings, because a lot of these places when they change, I don't know if this is true of Facebook, but a lot of times when they roll new updates, there's a bug or something, or it doesn't automatically retain your old settings, and stuff can get reverted to the defaults. So a lot of these networks, Facebook, Google, etc., if you want to try to make your privacy and whatnot better, you're going to constantly need to be going and checking and making sure that the settings are what you want. It's possible they could revert. So hopefully your old stuff will still be private, but anything new you're posting with these default settings where everything's basically shared with everyone, then that any new stuff is just going to end up leaking. And you're going to have to keep an extremely vigilant eye on that for that not to happen.
Yeah, this is it's very eye-opening. For those of you who are listening on the podcast, we're going to post the link for this into the show notes. If you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see it there in the show notes. I'm not sure if we can post links into our... Well, we'll see if we can put links into the podcast description, but if not, check out the Tech Topic YouTube channel, and we'll have this link definitely in those show notes.
Yeah. And at some point, hopefully, we've been talking about putting up a website. At some point, we have only a handful of people working on this. We don't have a whole team, and we have other stuff, other projects we're working on. But at some point, we'd like to put up companion notes and things for episodes. So no promises on that. Definitely sometime next year, since we're almost at the new year. But at some point, hopefully, we'll have all that on the website, and you can go pull some curated links and information per episode eventually. So,
right. And what we're looking at here is essentially, like he was describing, a radial chart that from 2005 to 2010, in just 10 years, Facebook went from relatively small amounts of information being shared with all Facebook users and none with the entire internet, to suddenly blowing up and allowing the entire internet to access most of all of your information with only two main categories, which seem to be somewhat restricted, which is contact info and birthday. And I'm going to imagine that's because it ties into personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
And it's there's probably some laws that are preventing them from fully filling out this radial graph here.
And so I would say, like, open source intelligence or OSINT, that's another aspect, is your birthday doesn't seem, and it honestly shouldn't be a big deal. But because we don't have any kind of actual digital identity system or any kind of national ID system, it is a big deal. Like, that's how they verify who you are. Your social security number, which used to say right on the card, not to be used for identification. When they designed the social security number, they were not designing an identity system. They were designing just a way to track and correlate. Here's how much money you put in when you were working. Therefore, you're entitled to get some out later. That's it. That was the only thing it was supposed to be used for. And there was a great article. I don't recall off the top of my head. I'll have to see if I can dig it up. But they talked about the evolution of how the Social Security number became the de facto national ID, even though it was explicitly never designed to be one. And that's caused a ton of problems. So your name, your Social Security number, your birthday, these shouldn't be sensitive, but until we have digital identity out there that is usable and ideally open and self-sovereign and distributed and all the cool things it really needs to be to not be awful, they are really sensitive. And it's really bad that even within your network, like you get a lot of weird friend requests on Facebook. And part of that is it's open source intelligence. They want to know the name of your first pet. They want to know all this stuff that might be password reset questions that might be able to be used for identity. So be real suspicious. Don't just add anyone who reaches out, because there's plenty of cases where people are trying to collect intelligence on you. And that's a big part of what Facebook has become.
Before we move on, I do want to read some of these slices of the radial graph we're looking at. So these are the things that in 2010 are fully accessible by the entire internet if you've put them into Facebook. It would be your gender, your pictures, your name, your likes, your photos. I'm not sure the difference, but I'm guessing picture is going to be your profile picture. Your photos, and I'm going to guess that those are the ones that you have set to public. There are some controls that allow you to do that.
Yeah, I think this is the default. If you don't set it to private, I think this is what automatically becomes public, from what I understand of this graph.
And in our chat, Alice Schmid made a great point, which is that it doesn't matter if you hide your birthday if everyone can see comments of your friends saying happy birthday.
Yeah. Information leakage is a real thing. Excellent point.
And then your wall posts, and I'm guessing networks has to do with which groups you're part of, things like that, and then your friends. So and other profile data, which covers a bunch of different things. So, of course, like we were saying, there are some privacy controls, but in my experience of trying to lock down my Facebook account when I had one, which we'll get to, I had to go through and I had to individually set each one of my bits of information from years, which ended up being thousands of things because I was a Facebook addict. I had thousands of individual posts and photos and things like that I had to go through one by one. So they make it very difficult for you to lock your profile down. And I would imagine the reason why being that most people would. Most people, once they hear about these kinds of things, once we get into later on what people can do with this kind of information, then, they would tend to want would want to lock it down.
That's the perfect transition, because that's exactly what's happening as of this week. We're two dudes on a podcast, so, we have not a ton of reach yet, and hopefully more soon. But we're saying this, it's not going to reach a ton of people right now, but Apple, which is a $1 trillion essentially organization that has global reach, just released iOS 14. And that's exactly what they have. When you install a new app, they have this huge laundry list of all the stuff. And if you want to know, actually, Nick Espinoza, we'll try to throw a link to his podcast. He did a short little thing on all of the info that Facebook shares. And he went screen by screen through. And it's easier to just say what they don't collect, which is basically anything that they haven't figured out a way to get. But it's insane. They want to know where you are. They want to know your location. Excuse me. They want microphone access. They want your contact information. They like any little bit of information they can hoover up about you. They want it all by default. And so it goes way beyond the graphic we just had up of, this problem of what information are you accidentally sharing with the world. Facebook is honestly, they want to know more about you than the CIA wants to know about you. They literally want everything from all the time. And this is why when we talk about payment networks, we talk about Libra, which they just rebranded, by the way. I'm forgetting the name of the rebrand, because Facebook has a smell to it now. Like it used to be the cool place to work in Silicon Valley, and it's not anymore. And a lot of people are really starting to have problems with the way they've conducted themselves. And so they had to rebrand Libra. But what a lot of people are saying, and I agree with this, is the one bit of data that's kind of still hard for Facebook to get their hands on about you, which is really valuable, is purchasing. What are you buying? And especially if they're helping advertisers, well, they want to know what the conversions are. Like, cool, they showed you ads, but did you buy what they showed you? Is it working? Are them shoving those ads in your face? You know, can they justify that to the advertiser? Be like, oh, look, if we shove these ads in these people's faces this percent of the time, they spend the money. That's really valuable, because right now there have been some articles about how ineffective Facebook advertising actually is. It's expensive, but not very effective. So by putting out cryptocurrency stuff, by trying to become a payment processor, Facebook now could get that final bit of information. In addition to all the info they already have, now they know exactly what you're buying if you're buying it, if you're using their network. So that's really, it makes sense, but it's terrifying, the implications. But I think Libra, and it's killing me. I forget the rename right now, but Libra, stay away from that. Any payment, anything associated with Facebook is something to stay far, far, far away from.
Yeah. Definitely don't give financial information to Facebook. I can imagine that Facebook's also, in the business of purchasing purchase habits from other companies and correlating them. It would make sense if I was solely concerned with my bottom line of my advertisement, revenue, then I would probably do that as well. I have other concerns other than that, thankfully, in my life. So
yeah. Oh, one
and
thing,
I don't work in advertisement anymore.
So Facebook, I looked it up. The Libra was renamed to Diem. So yeah, stay away from it. You'll have a crappy Diem if you
nice.
If you use that. So stay away from Diem, and they'll probably rename it once or twice more. Again, the stink is getting real hard to wash off. So, well, anyway, we're not going to get in. I don't think we're going to cover the lawsuits, but there have been some major federal actions against Facebook and Google recently. So it's, yeah, the law and the public are finally starting to take notice and demand that things change, not just kind of take these false assurances. Oh, we'll do better next time. Yeah, someday. Well, yeah, no, we hear you. We're not listening to you, but we hear you. So I hate when people say, I hear you. It drives me nuts. There's hearing, there's listening, and there's actually understanding, which is kind of important. Hearing is like, yes, the sound waves hit my eardrums. Great. Is that going to have any effect? Anyway.
All right. So let's move on to the next big bullet item here from Zuckerberg. It's encryption. You happen to know a little bit about this. We did do our pilot on encryption, which was pretty cool. So let's talk about encryption real quick. Here's what it states, as it says, people's private communications should be secure. End-to-end encryption prevents anyone, including us, from seeing what people share on our services. I have heard that they've purchased some companies that had some great encryption, and then they ended up softening it up so that
they did.
So do you know anything about that, or?
I have to be honest, I have not specifically looked into how Facebook has implemented the encryption. And that may seem like an omission, but it's not. It's honestly just, I have other stuff to do with my time. And given their track record, I don't trust it. So, the famous thing, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So without going into any of the technical details of encryption, because we don't need to, there's a very simple concept. I don't care what you're doing with encryption. And yes, the military uses end-to-end encryption, so it is military grade. People love saying that. Like, in theory, it can be. And they're probably using strong algorithms, because AES and other algorithms are out there. They've been tested. Like, I have not seen any successful attacks against AES. And yeah, quantum computers and all this. Sure, bump your key size from 128 bits up to 256. Just as good as AES 128 pre-quantum computers, which is unbreakable, essentially. It's that simple. It's not hard. So the key thing, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, do you think that it's their fault that they're because I was just looking it up, and WhatsApp used to be. My understanding from what I was reading is that WhatsApp used to be fully end-to-end encrypted, and now it is not, and it's now they can get through, and that also what ties into what you were just saying is that their form of end-to-end encryption isn't the same thing as what you're talking about, which is military grade end-to-end encryption. So what's the difference there?
So the big difference has nothing to do with the end-to-end encryption itself. The big difference has to do, and I harp on this in the security field when I talk to security and non-security people. It's like if you put a bank vault door on your house, right? No one's kicking down the bank vault door. It's 3 foot thick of solid steel. It has, 4-inch bolts, like 12 of them on a side. You couldn't drive a car through that. It would stop the car. But if you leave the key under the mat, it's not going to keep anyone out. They're just like, oh, look, there's the key, and they're going to come right in. So what everyone always completely forgets about end-to-end encryption, because it has become a buzzword. Where are the keys stored and how are they generated? The key is critical. It doesn't matter how good the encryption is if the key is not carefully managed. And that's the problem, is a lot of these companies are like, oh, yeah, end-to-end encryption. Okay, so the military, when they do end-to-end encryption, they have a very strict regime for generating the keys. And then the way they distribute the keys is armed couriers. It's a dude carrying the military equivalent of a flash drive, which is a really hardened device. You could drive a Hummer over it and it's fine. Carrying that, he's armed. He's got guys around him who are heavily armed. He's got backup to call in air support, like whatever he needs, like extremely heavily armed couriers, which you could do the same, but hiring someone with that level of security would be pretty expensive. So we don't. So when you talk about end-to-end encryption on these platforms, like any of these platforms, I don't care whether you're talking Facebook or WhatsApp or my current Zoom hasn't ruined it yet, but I like Keybase. It started really good. It was really innovative. We'll see if it stays that way now that Zoom bought them. But where are these keys being generated? If you're not generating the key on your device from a good entropy source, and then if that key is not being carefully transmitted and kept safe between you and the person you're encrypting, because that's the problem with end-to-end encryption, is generally you're going to do this with a symmetric cipher, and we won't get into the whole thing about how public key relates to that. So symmetric cipher, but you need the same key at both ends of the tunnel. So the problem is, in order for us to communicate, before we can communicate securely, we have to have the same key. How do I get you that key without compromising it? Because I don't yet have a secure channel. So how do I send you something secure in order to establish the secure channel? And so you run into this catch-22 of not having a way securely to get the key to be able to establish the secure channel. And like I said, armed couriers in the military. In the civilian world, we try some other stuff, and this could be a whole series, but there's stuff like Diffie-Hellman key exchange. There's ways of negotiating a key with someone securely, but you still have to know who you're negotiating with, and that has a whole nother set of problems. So there's all these issues that if you screw up any one of these things, cryptography is extremely unforgiving. It is very hard to get right, very easy to screw up, and any one little screw up, it is like a chain. If any one link in the chain breaks, the whole thing is worthless. You only need one failure across the entire chain, no matter how long it is. And so when Facebook, there's nowhere in Facebook to like manage your keys and see where the keys are. Facebook is generating the key for you and then seeding that key to both ends of the channel. So yeah, if your adversary is someone who's not Facebook, you should have pretty good privacy against external adversaries now that it's end-to-end encrypted. So that's good. That's better than not. But if your adversary, if your threat model is, I don't want Facebook snooping through all my data to sell it to advertisers and do whatever other stuff they're going to do with it, you're completely open to that. They generated the key. And I mean, maybe they say, oh, Scout's Honor will destroy our copy and not Peak. But given their track record of everything else, really though, prove it. Like, really prove that you don't have the key. Because if you just generate the key and send it to both ends, like, I'm actually more worried about what you're going to do with my data, Facebook, than what an external person is going to do with the data. So the biggest threat that I'm concerned about is totally unmitigated by having it's irrelevant whether you have end-to-end encryption. if you don't have a way of generating and managing your own keys. Totally irrelevant.
So I have a question then. In here it says end-to-end encryption prevents anyone, including us, from seeing what people share on our services. If they are lying about the including us part, the whole Scouts Honor thing, are there any laws or is there any recourse against that kind of a lie?
No, I don't believe so. And if there were, the terms of service that you never read and always click yes to, they probably have one or several things in there, even if there were a law that are just like, well, you said, though, that you're giving up that right, or binding arbitration, or any other number of things. So, I mean, it's great marketing copy. Like I said, I agree with the statements here. Like, it's great. The problem is the implementation and the follow through of actually living up to these statements is lacking.
Yeah. So, dang. As any of you thinking that your late night messenger sessions were completely encrypted end to end, this is bad news for you.
They are, but the key's compromised, so who cares?
Yeah.
If the key gets compromised in encryption, it doesn't matter how good the encryption is. Even a one-time pad, which is the only fully mathematically provably secure cipher out there, like, doesn't matter, quantum nothing, you cannot break a one-time pad. Well, if you have copies of the pad all over the place and you've spread it around, doesn't matter. Still trivial to break the encryption.
Right.
Key management is the single, it's like, since the beginning of the internet and encryption, that's been the hard part of trying to use encryption, is key management, and it remains an unsolved problem. It's still extremely difficult. So
at least we can say that Facebook is probably the only entity that can get access to this information, but Facebook could also share that access with whoever they want. Are there any laws against that they can't share this information with others, or does the terms of service also cover that?
I would have to review it, but I doubt it. And again, TOS, even if there were a law, TOS probably, when you signed that, you probably gave that up. Speaking of laws, though, and encryption and sharing information, if you pull up CALEA, CALEA, this is something that is out there. The FBI, make sure it's the FBI.gov page, but there is a CALEA page. It's a Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. This is not new. It's been around for decades. And it says that if you are going to build a communication platform, then you must have a way to cooperate with law enforcement. You're going to have to, no, that's not the FBI page, but that looks close enough. That looks like it's legit. I think it's probably a sub page, but there is actually an FBI.gov page that talks about CALEA. It's much drier. So if you're going to make any kind of communication gear, this was originally meant for telephones and stuff. You're going to have the ability to, if you are served a search warrant by a court, then you're going to have to be able to actually allow access to those communications. And so Facebook, again, when they're like, oh yeah, no, we're destroying the key. Really though? Because you have to comply with CALEA. So if you did destroy the key, you would be unable to comply and you'd be facing a federal lawsuit. So I don't think you are destroying the key, because that would put you in legal trouble.
Wow, that's interesting. And
it's
I guess
amazing.
I wish we had an attorney that knew more about the laws here. Maybe somebody we could bring on the show, because this seems to have a lot of legal implications, and I'd love to know where the line on Facebook just making business decisions ends and where laws begin in terms of forcing certain things like saving keys and things like that. Because I know that Australia just recently had some kind of a law that was changed, and they're trying to force it so this way they can decrypt whatever they want. Do you know anything about that?
That's a somewhat of a different thing. It's related though. I don't know the specifics of that law, but there was a gentleman on LinkedIn, Andrew Commons, he's awesome. Love his post. Like, this is someone who's been in the industry decades and really knows his stuff. And yeah, he was railing against that, because not only the Australia law, and there's stuff in England as well, this is an outgrowth of what we call in the industry and security the crypto wars. And going back to, I'm forgetting the time frame. Schneier has a good write up on the crypto wars and the second crypto wars. And I'm not sure if we're considering where we are now still just an extension of the second crypto wars or the third crypto wars. But there was a thing proposed many, many decades ago called the Clipper chip. And the Clipper chip was a what's called the key escrow device. And the idea was if you're building a telephone or anything else, you would generate these end-to-end keys. And then this chip would take those keys and it would send a copy off to a government agency somewhere to be escrowed so that no one would have access to it in theory, except if the government needed to wiretap, then they could just go look up the key from the server to be able to wiretap the communications when they had a court, order. And so that's not entirely unreasonable. The problem, as everyone pointed out, is that first of all, you're hoping that the courts, never get perverted, that always do their job perfectly, which they do a decent job, but not perfectly. No one ever does. And secondly, you're hoping that this key escrow service doesn't ever get hacked. And with SolarWinds in the news and with the OPM breach, even relatively, you would hope government facilities should be pretty heavily secured. We've got plenty of examples now, especially after SolarWinds, of those Nuclear Regulatory Agency had some of their, not their really secure. I have not heard anything concerning oh God, we could shut down nuclear plants or we could, launch nukes. I'm not worried about that yet. Those tend to be very well air gapped and running a little more hardened software. But just some of the records of who's supplying plutonium and fuel and stuff, which is concerning in its own right. Those may have been compromised. So this idea that the government could have this incredible honeypot, because again, literally the keys to everyone's communications, you don't think someone's going to try to hack that. That is one of the juiciest targets you could ever possibly create anywhere. It's going to be under constant attack, and you can't air gap that. You can't wall that off because it needs to be constantly receiving new keys for new phone calls. And so it's got to be connected. Someone else will find a way in. And then they will have access to everything. And whoever else they decide to give access to, it could be several groups that figure it out. So we argued 5 years or so about this is a dangerously stupid idea. If we do the Clipper chip, if we do key escrow for the US, it will bite us in the ass in a way we could barely imagine. It will compromise all communication. There'll be no privacy whatsoever. So we argued this, and everyone finally agreed, even reluctantly. Some of the politicians were like, oh, I guess it was kind of a stupid idea. Maybe we shouldn't do that. And they gave up. And then just a decade ago, we had Crypto Wars V2, where they brought it back up. And they're like, oh, we can't. People are moving on to these tech platforms. We can't see what's going on. Law enforcement is blind. We need to have key escrow, and we need to have these other ways of breaking into the encryption. We kind of argued that successfully again and got the politicians to back down. But here we are once again. Australia's following through. They're finally going all in on key escrow type stuff. England is close behind. I don't think quite as far as Australia. And people are seriously discussing this over the last year or two in America of weakening all encryption. And it's we're already getting hacked left and right. Last thing we need to do is make it even easier to intercept those communications so that anyone can pull all your sensitive information and get into those, phone calls and just communications with websites. This would affect the little TLS, little lock icon you see. If we weaken encryption, that's not going to stay strong. That's going to go with it too. And that already has plenty of problems. We don't need it to be weaker than it is. So this would basically destroy the US ability to use computers for anything more than just toy stuff. You could definitely not buy anything. You would not want to do anything more, serious than purchasing. It's a terrible idea. It will not die. It keeps coming back. It keeps getting worse each time. So I wish I could say, oh yeah, we keep slapping it down. The security community keeps pointing out how dangerous an idea this is and keep shaking the politicians back to their senses, but that's not how it's going. We're getting dumber each time we have a crypto war and closer to losing it and weakening encryption for everyone. And that'll destroy the tech industry. That'll destroy not just the industry, but anyone's ability to use tech for anything meaningful will collapse if that actually goes through. And it's getting close.
It seems as though we're going to keep on having folks, special interest groups, try and implement this until they get it implemented and then see the consequences of it, let us feel the consequences of it, and then roll it back. And then finally people will have something to point to and say, oh yeah, we tried that and it doesn't work. But
it may be harder to roll back, and the damage done may take a while to recover from.
Well, Hopefully, Australia can be a case study for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
All right,
Sucks for them. I don't wish that on them, but yeah, if nothing else, they can act as a warning, hopefully.
Yeah. Let's move on. We got a couple more here to look at. The next one's reducing permanence. So I believe Germany or some European countries call this the right to be forgotten. And so what do you think in general about the right to be forgotten? Do you think that that's a good thing? And second off, what do you think about this description of it, which is people should be comfortable being themselves? This comes from Mark Zuckerberg. Okay.
Yeah.
People should be comfortable being themselves and should not have to worry about what they share coming back to hurt them later. So we won't keep messages or stories around for longer than necessary to deliver the service or longer than people want them. So I guess I can imagine this being interpreted as, well, we have a delete feature. You can go back and you can delete anything you want. You just have to individually go back and click on each one and wait a couple of seconds for the little, the progress indicator to finish, and then move on to the next one.
Yeah. We made it easy. You have to click on each thing individually. We made it easy, so you're likely to use this feature.
Right. So what do you think of the idea, first off, outside of Facebook, of this right to be forgotten?
Well, this is part of GDPR as well, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. And I don't know, I think CCPA, which is based pretty, I guess I'd say pretty heavily on GDPR, the California Consumer Protection Act, which is the closest thing currently that the U.S. has to GDPR. It's only effective in California. There are some other states that are dabbling with passing something along the lines of CCPA. But anyway, this right to be forgotten, it makes sense. I'm actually glad I grew up, at our age. There's pictures and stupid things we did, just stupid stuff we did as kids, because kids try stuff and you do stupid stuff. It's part of learning. You're like, well, that was dumb. I'm not doing that again. But it was nice because back when we were kids, it wasn't being recorded and live streamed to the world. So you do something stupid and only your friends would know you did something stupid. And maybe they would tell people about it at school, but there was no evidence to share pictures and videos and all this. So it was really, I don't know, there's something nice about that. I agree with the principle. Once again, great principle. Although there is a downside to that, and you look at companies like Reputation.com, and so while there is a right to be forgotten, where especially kids should be able to have a clean start and forget their past and all the dumb stuff they did as kids and kind of make a new life and get professional when they turn into an adult, there's the other side of people like Harvey Weinstein and some of these abusers. I don't think they do have a right to be forgotten. If you've done horrible things, you shouldn't be able to wipe that. I mean, if you truly have reformed yourself, in some cases, fine. You deserve a second shot. You shouldn't get blackballed forever because you screwed one thing up or, went bankrupt or something. Like, okay, fine, you can get that purged from your record. And the law allows certain things to be purged. But there are certain things that are so horrific that no. Certain things I don't think you should ever have a right to be forgotten. It's kind of why we put people on the sex offender registry. And there's controversy there, which mostly with exactly who should be on there. If you were drunk and ended up peeing in a bush and got caught, probably shouldn't be on the sex offender registry. But then again, like the level 4 people who've done horrific things, like, yeah, no, we should never forget that you did that. Everyone should know because you are a danger. It's important to society that we not forget what happened. So there's two sides of this. But the other thing that I'll say with right to be forgotten is I think Facebook's view, their little passage there is carefully worded, as is the rest of that statement. And it's a really narrow, incomplete view that makes it not very good, not very useful, because this is the problem with kids sharing, pictures and stuff and inadvisable texts. You can screenshot. And even if you can't screenshot, you can get another device, another phone. You can take your iPad, point it at your phone, and take a picture of the screen. So you can never, there's no way to limit how far data can travel. And you see all these posts. I don't know if there's big now, but on Facebook, way back when I was actually active on there, you would see these posts routinely of some teacher holding a sign saying, oh, share this post. I want to show my students how far an image can travel. And it's like, okay. And you see like 50,000 shares and all kinds of likes and stuff. But it's like, there's an aspect here that was never talked about. If it's a boring picture of some teacher just standing there with a sign, yeah, some people are going to share that. They're going to be like, oh, that's an important message. I'll click share. If it's a picture that's really compromising that you don't want anyone to see, that's getting shared everywhere, not just on Facebook. That's getting screenshotted. That's getting saved. That's getting uploaded to 4chan and all these other places. Like, the less you want the information out there, the more you want to forget it, the further it's going to spread. So we have this awful paradox where the information you really care about that you want to last forever, those benign pictures of just some vacation or spending time with your niece or some whatever, those might get lost. Those aren't going to get spread all over the internet because they're not that interesting. They're interesting to you, but they're not interesting to anyone else. So yeah, you totally might lose those if you don't back them up. But the information that you really want to go away, you're like, oh God, how did that get out? I never wanted that picture to get out. That's going to go everywhere. Someone somewhere will always have a copy of that picture. There will be no way for you to get rid of it. So be very careful what you share, because what you share can and will be used against you. And that right to be forgotten, there's just no way around that. If Facebook, and this isn't even a Facebook issue directly, if you put information out there that's compromising, like nude pictures are obviously the canonical example, and they get out there, if you show it to even one person who's not trustworthy, then it's going to be out there forever. And there's basically nothing you can do about it. And that sucks. But without really perverting and destroying all of computing to try to be able to track it down on every device, which is a really dangerous idea, it's out there forever. So be very careful. That right to be forgotten will just never exist outside of a dystopian technological world.
Well put. Yeah. So we only have about 8 minutes left. So let's try and get through these last three pretty quickly. Mark Zuckerberg also stated that one of the principles of a privacy-focused platform should be safety. That people should expect that we will do everything we can to keep them safe on our services within the limits of what's possible in an encrypted service. Do you think that they're following through on that? I
almost want to skip that, so we'll make it real quick. What do you mean by safety? It's not defined there. I know we talked a little bit pre-show about Facebook moderators, and they do have tens of thousands of moderators. I think 15,000 or something like that. It changes, but they have a whole bunch of people that have this horrific job of just everything that gets flagged on Facebook. They have to look at it and they have to decide whether it actually needs to be taken down or not. And they have pictures of horrific, like beheadings and different abuse, child abuse, all this kind of stuff. Most of those people, maximum 2 years before they burn out and then end up basically with PTSD, because the human mind, you can't stare at the worst of what humanity has to offer 9 to 5 every day for 2 years, every weekday. Like it does too much damage to the mind. So they're kind of trying, although the one thing that's really disturbing is I haven't dug deep into that, but I also have seen cases and some of the articles and write-ups I've read about the moderators. You would assume, you see a picture of child abuse, you would assume that would be handed off to the authorities. From what I've read, that's not what's happening. That occasionally happens, but it's not, the protocol is not, oh man, that's horrible, delete. That shouldn't be the protocol. It should be like, forward this to the FBI, to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, to other appropriate, let's get something done about this. That's not what's happening. And part of that may just be that the resources aren't quite there. If they were just constantly sending this huge stream of photos, maybe it would overwhelm. I don't know all the details there, so I can't speak about how this is not happening, or who knows, maybe they changed policy. I haven't looked into that a while. Maybe they are starting to do that. But I would expect that if we're using the word safety and you're seeing actual horrific abuse and crimes, you better have some kind of cooperation with law enforcement to stop it, because if you can't use the word safety if you're not.
I agree. I also saw that there's 15,000 people moderating those videos for Facebook, which got me thinking, there's these 15,000 people being exposed to, and my understanding is they're not paid the same as, say, engineers at Facebook. They're not paid the same as people who are in very cushy positions at Facebook. They're put into these smaller centers crammed in there, and or I guess right now it's probably done. I heard that some of this can't be done from home due to the nature of the
Yeah.
kind of content.
Yeah.
So they're having to brave COVID, go
Yeah.
into these centers, and then look at the worst of the worst things that were ever posted on the internet for less money than the people who are in the cushy positions, and that
Yeah.
these people are essentially making it possible for others to be able to, post on Facebook. And I'm guessing that's because of laws. That's because, or maybe because they're trying to avoid litigation or something like that. But I do feel for
Well,
these folks, and I do feel bad that there's an entire. I mean, that's a pretty sizable town. A town of 15,000 people is pretty big, and you can imagine like there's a whole like midwestern town worth of people who are all going through PTSD and having to do that as their career in order to support this platform. So
yeah. And keep in mind, the churn rate is max 2 years. So that's not just 15,000. That's currently 15,000.
Right.
I don't know how many people they've actually burned through over the years. So
right. So that's sad. So next we have interoperability. I'm not sure how much we can talk to this, but how interoperable do you? Well, here's what Mark Zuckerberg says first. He says people should be able to use any of our apps to reach their friends, and they should be able to communicate across networks easily and securely. How easily? What do you think of that at face value?
I think it is very carefully worded. They should be able to reach their friends, which are also on Facebook, across any networks. Notice they don't say anything about using whatever software they want, whatever other services, actual interoperability with other, because email, you don't have to be on Gmail. If you have Gmail, you can email anyone else who has any email server anywhere on the planet. That's why email still is popular. It's the one remaining federated service where you can use whatever you want. You're not stuck with one provider. Most of today's new things are really locked down. Facebook, LinkedIn, they're all feudal internet, like basically societies. You're a serf on one of these, lords' kingdoms, and none of them interoperate with each other. You can't cross-post a link. I mean, you can copy and paste, but you can't have like a link on LinkedIn that you really effortlessly share, or people from Facebook can't be commenting. None of these things interoperate because the value of the company goes back to how many people they have within their little internet kingdom. So I find that very carefully worded. That it basically sidesteps or redefines interoperability to be the weakest, least useful. Like basically, yeah, Facebook can run on not just one network. Well, yeah, that's called the internet. And you could talk to your friends if they're also on Facebook. Like, great. That's not interoperability. Interoperability would be something like Matrix, Scuttlebutt, some of these new services, where you could actually, and I may be misspeaking there. I don't know if any of those actually interoperate with each other. But what we want is something ideally like email, where a message from one person can reach any other person on any other service using any other software trivially, as easy as a message within the service can reach someone else. That's what I would, to me, that's the kind of interoperability that actually matters, that we should be fighting for.
Kind of how SMS will work, whether you have an Android phone or you have an iOS phone, or you're still one of those poor people who still has one of those Windows phones. Okay, so last but not least, secure data storage. I know we only have a minute here, but I'm going to give you the whole minute because I know you got a lot to say about secure data storage. People should expect that we won't store sensitive data in countries with weak records on human rights like privacy and freedom of expression in order to protect data from being improperly accessed.
Oh, yeah. Definitely thoughts. Again, if you had real end-to-end encryption and you just encrypted the data with your key and then stored it encrypted at rest, you wouldn't have to worry. It doesn't matter what country it's in. If the data is encrypted in your device before it's sent out, it doesn't matter. As long as the key is good and the cipher is strong, it's useless to anyone else. Now, that does get in the way of actually sharing, like doing a post that can reach multiple people, because once again, you have to make sure they have the ability to decrypt that post. So we're not going to get into the whole considerations in 1 minute of, how would you design a system that would actually allow true end-to-end encryption and do social posts and all this. But the short answer is you need something called the web of trust. And that's how you can properly manage those keys. And that's how you can actually design that. We could do a whole nother episode on that. But yeah, I don't know. The other last thing worth mentioning is the US, we've had some issues with people kind of digging into data and whatnot. So yeah, China's going to dig through your data and do horrible things, but so is the US, which is why a lot of people have kind of moved over to European hosting options. Ever since Snowden, people just don't trust hosting in the US. So I don't know. Like I said, that statement, interesting statement. I think that's one of the lesser issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the weasel word here is weak. I think really it should be weaker records on human rights than the U.S. I wouldn't say putting kids and immigrants into cages gives us a strong record on human rights. I don't think and when we're talking about records on human rights, I don't think a country like ours, which had legal slavery for that long, not that long ago, has a record of strong human rights. But if it was weaker, maybe then it would, at face value, seem right. All right. Well, I think overall, this is a good start. I think we're going to have to do some more episodes on not just Facebook, but on different social networks, and eventually build that up. So this way we can maybe go around, talk about all the different major social networks, and then build that up to an overall conversation about social networks as a whole and how they're affecting us, and what kind of implications for society they have as a whole. Maybe what might the future look like if we want to preserve things like keeping in touch with our family, sharing our photos, having a voice online, with problems like, different kinds of special interest groups and governments and parties trying to use these as a platform to push out their own interests, which may or may not be true or based in fact. So yeah, well, I guess we'll build up to that. For now, I think this is a good stopping point for for going over the privacy issues that are associated with Facebook. And from there, we'll move on. So, everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. Those of you who are watching live, we're going to take a half-hour break, and then we're going to begin recording the Wednesday episode the Tuesday episode of Code and Chaos. I can't remember how we have that figured out, actually, but we're going to be recording another show right after this in about 30 minutes. So stick around, and we will be back soon. For those of you who are listening on the podcast, we thank you for tuning in. We'll have new content for you every Monday, and we will try to pick the best topics about technology and its implications for society. Elio, anything you want to say before we go?
No, I think we covered some good ground. We didn't even get to the psychographics and all that, but future episodes, stay tuned.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care.